Yes, I think a lot of people now are starting to think that with the way the crash happened, we believe the way the crash happened, the car being pursued by paparazzi, I think a lot of people at this stage are starting to blame the press for the accident. So there has been a bit of a backlash in London, we know of, anyway, against the press as well.
Great. Dennis Broadfield, thanks very much for joining us. And we've just received these pictures coming in from Buckingham Palace, where people have been arriving to pay their respects. As you can see, many have brought flowers and laid them at the gates. The first bouquets arrived this morning at around 7 o'clock. Very visible signs of grief. The Prime Minister, Tony Blair, has said that he's utterly devastated and said the whole country will be in a state of shock and mourning. He described Diana as a wonderful, warm and compassionate person. If you've just joined us, Buckingham Palace has confirmed that Diana, Princess of Wales, has died in a car crash in Paris. The Princess was travelling in a Mercedes with her companion Dodi Al-Fayed. The vehicle crashed in a tunnel near the River Seine. Dodi Fayed also died in the crash. It's reported the couple were being pursued by photographers. News of Diana's death was passed to the royal family by the French ambassador, who telephoned the Queen's private secretary. We'll bring you more details later this hour. Good morning. You're watching Channel 1. Buckingham Palace has confirmed that Diana, Princess of Wales, has tragically died in a car crash in Paris. We'll be bringing you the news of what's happened and looking back at her life. Buckingham Palace has confirmed that Diana, Princess of Wales, has died. She was killed in a car crash in Paris early this morning. The Princess was travelling in a Mercedes with her companion, Dodi Al-Fayed, when the vehicle crashed in a tunnel near the River Seine. Dodi Fayed also died in the crash. It's reported the couple were being pursued by photographers. News of Diana's death was passed to the royal family by the French ambassador, who telephoned the Queen's private secretary at Balmoral, where the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh, the Prince of Wales and William and Harry are spending their summer holidays. This report from Andy Ivey.
It was just after midnight when the car carrying Princess Diana and her friend Dodi Al-Fayed went out of control. It was travelling at high speed, apparently being chased by press photographers on motorbikes. Diana was rushed to the intensive care unit of the Salpêtrière hospital in eastern Paris, but 5 hours later the French Interior Minister confirmed the worst. Doctors had been unable to save her life. Jean-Pierre Chevènement expressed his condolences to the royal family, relatives of the victims and the British people.
J'adresse les condoléances de la France à la famille royale.
The French ambassador passed the news of Diana's death to the royal family. Diana, who was 36, had been dining at the Ritz with Dodi Al-Fayed. He was killed too, along with the driver. A fourth person in the car, one of the princess's bodyguards, was injured and freed from the crushed wreckage. Foreign Secretary Robin Cook, who's visiting the Philippines, gave the first official reaction.
I am greatly shocked by this news. Our first thoughts must be with her children and with her family at this time of immense loss to them. I was fortunate to have the opportunity of working with the Princess on her international charity work. I believe what has happened is a tragic loss at a young age of someone who'd shown great courage and commitment in drawing attention to serious issues. For the next few days, her family and the nation must have time to come to terms with their immense sadness and loss. In the longer term, serious questions will need to be asked as to whether the aggressive intrusion into her privacy has contributed to this tragedy. Thank you.
For weeks, photographers have been trying to get pictures of Diana and 41-year-old Dodi Al-Fayed, heir to the Harrods fortune. Police in Paris have detained 7 photographers, all French, as officials begin the investigation into this tragic accident.
There's been an outpouring of grief from around the world this morning at the news of the princess's death. Mourners have already been gathering outside Buckingham Palace to pay their respects, and many of the world's leaders have paid tribute to the princess. President Bill Clinton has said that he was profoundly saddened by her death. He said, "Hillary and I knew the princess well, and we were both very fond of her." Rachel Ellison reports.
There were feelings of disbelief from many of the mourning who'd come to Buckingham Palace to pay their respects.
I just think it's terribly sad. It really is terribly, terribly sad.
We decided as a family that we would just have to do something, and there's nothing we can do. We can only grieve.
Other Londoners were marking their feelings of loss outside Harrods in Knightsbridge. Harrods boss Mohammed Al-Fayed said this morning that the world had lost an irreplaceable princess. He's reported to be deeply shocked at the death of his beloved eldest son, Dodi. International figures and world leaders have been offering their condolences and talking about their sense of loss of a princess that many held in high regard. In Calcutta, Mother Teresa expressed sorrow and concern over the death, whilst leaders from Pakistan, including the former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, said it was the children who were uppermost in their minds. Princes William and Harry were due to reunite with their mother at Kensington Palace today after their summer break at Balmoral. The Prince of Wales broke the tragic news to them in the early hours of this morning. Rachel Ellison, Channel 1, Kensington Palace.
Diana, Princess of Wales, captured the hearts of the nation. Since her fairy tale marriage, her picture has filled the pages of newspapers and magazines across the world. Ginny Troussard reports.
For millions watching on television, it was a romantic fairy tale. The shy bride with her husband 13 years her senior. But the happiness was not to last. Just over a year ago, her divorce from Charles was formalised, and with it the loss of the title Her Royal Highness. But her loss of royal status was not the end of her public life. It seemed that everywhere she went, a posse of camera crews and photographers followed. She became the most photographed woman in the world. Her recent campaign to ban landmines brought her much publicity, not all of it favourable. But it was her relationship with Dodi Al-Fayed which prompted the most frenetic coverage. They were photographed without a care in the world in each other's arms. It appeared that, after so much sadness, she had finally found happiness. Ginny Troussard, Channel 1, Central London.
Well, there's been an outpouring of grief from around the world at the death of Princess Diana this morning. Joining me now in the studio is our reporter Dennis Broadfield. You've just come in from the newsroom. What's the reaction around the world this morning?
Well, as you can imagine, great sadness, but and extraordinarily, most foreign leaders have already wished their condolences to the family, and from all around the world. It's been quite extraordinary. Bill Clinton this morning has said that his wife and himself knew them very, very well, especially Diana. She'd been to many galas at the White House, and he held her with deep affection, and it was a great loss. From the Pacific region, the Australian Prime Minister John Howard has said the death in such tragic circumstances will shock and sadden all Australians. You remember she'd been to Australia many times, and the Australians held her in deep, deep affection, and it'll be very sad in that country today. The same for the New Zealand Prime Minister. He's already offered his condolences. We have Cambodia's King, Norodom Sihanouk, has also expressed his condolences, all the way from the Pakistan Prime Minister. So generally, around the world, a lot of people are deeply shocked and very, very saddened. And just one last, final dear friend of Diana's is Mother Teresa, and she's expressed her sorrow over her death and said they will be praying for her today.
What's the reaction here in London this morning?
Well, once again, the reaction is from what we've heard from Buckingham Palace so far, the people down there, people are very stunned. They can't believe this has happened. It seems such a tragic waste. There's also been a little bit of a backlash at the press. I think a lot of people now are starting to think that with the way the crash happened, we believe the way the crash happened, the car being pursued by paparazzi, I think a lot of people at this stage are starting to blame the press for the accident. So there has been a bit of a backlash in London, we know of anyway, against the press as well.
Great. Dennis Broadfield, thanks very much for joining us. Well, joining me now is our reporter, Sasha Herriman, who's down at Kensington Palace. Sasha, what's happening down there at the moment?
Well, people have been turning up since the small hours, since the small hours this morning. They've been laying wreaths and flowers and that kind of thing. And also some people have lighted candles. They've been leaving messages of condolence to Diana and to her family.
What about the reaction of the mourners? Have you spoken to anyone this morning?
Yes, I've spoken to quite a few people, and there's a lot of grief, there's quite a few tearful faces, and there's also a little bit of aggravation towards the media, because obviously it's alleged that paparazzi were actually following Diana at the time of the incident.
Has there been any official word from the palace yet?
No, there's no official word as yet, and we're still waiting to hear something, waiting for an official to come and tell us what's actually going to be happening. But as soon as we do get word, we will be back with you.
And we've just received these pictures coming in from Buckingham Palace, where people have been arriving to pay their respects. As you can see, many have brought flowers and laid them at the gates. The first bouquets arrived this morning at around 7 o'clock. Very visible signs of grief. The Prime Minister, Tony Blair, has said that he's utterly devastated and said the whole country will be in a state of shock and mourning. He described Diana as a wonderful, warm and compassionate person. If you've just joined us, Buckingham Palace has confirmed that Diana, Princess of Wales, has died in a car crash in Paris. The Princess was travelling in a Mercedes with her companion Dodi Al-Fayed. The vehicle crashed in a tunnel near the River Seine. Dodi Fayed also died in the crash. It's reported the couple were being pursued by photographers. News of Diana's death was passed to the royal family by the French ambassador, who telephoned the Queen's private secretary. We'll bring you more details later this hour. The country is in a state of mourning at the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. She was killed in a car crash in Paris with her companion Dodi Al-Fayed. Their Mercedes was being pursued by a pack of press photographers on motorbikes.
I think there has been concern in Britain, in the press and the media, that there should be a line drawn and that it should be drawn by a responsible press and by responsible media, rather than having it drawn for them by others, with the development of a stronger press complaint system. And I'm certain that that is the right way to go. The paparazzi clearly wouldn't have been pursuing her were it not for the fact that the photographs that of her that they took earned so much money for them.
Well, tributes to Princess Diana have been coming in from around the world. President Clinton said he was deeply saddened by her death. In Australia, Prime Minister John Howard said people would be shocked and saddened. Mother Teresa, a friend of Diana's, said she and her missionaries nuns were praying for her. Dodi Fayed's father, Mohammed Al-Fayed, called it an appalling and quite needless tragedy. And the latest news from French police is that Diana's body will be flown back to Britain today.
Well, the nation has been waking up to the news. The impact has left many stunned. People have been laying flowers at the gates to Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace in an open show of grief and respect. There's been no formal statement about any period of mourning, but as Sarah Shah now reports, ordinary people are struggling to come to terms with the sudden loss.
The headlines in the morning newspapers, only hours old, were already out of date. They only said that Princess Diana was injured. But as the news of her death spread, by radio, by television and word of mouth, the queues grew. Some had been following developments all night.
Everyone in the restaurant, complete shock. Everyone stopped. I put the cable channels on, and we even have actual customers crying. And news spread, and because where we work is open all night, people were coming and coming and coming.
To others, it was a complete shock.
Can't take it in really at the moment. I'm going to work, but are you joking me? Is this a joke, or is it? I didn't even know that. I really didn't know that.
It's really sad, but there's nothing more I can say. I really feel sorry for the family, especially the children. I really felt it. I've got children myself, so I know how it is.
Daily life went on, but there was a growing sense of sadness tinged with anger.
She just wanted to lead a normal life, but as you know, she couldn't even do that.
What will she be remembered for?
For the help she does for everyone. She helps people, and she's just a good person. Very
the way she stand out to the press, that's what she'll be missed for as well.
It's unbelievable that such a strong public figure in the public eye all the time just suddenly be wiped out.
And people came in ones and twos to Buckingham Palace, bringing flowers.
Even growing up, you remember when she got married and she did all these things, and I really just think, I don't know, it just made me sad because this was the first time you'd see her be happy.
It's nothing to do with the fact that she was a member of the royal family. I think that she was a celebrity victim, and I think she came through it, and that was a good example to a lot of people. And, who's going to fight those people's causes now,
The people starting to arrive here today say it's because Diana has touched their lives in some way. As the day wears on, it will sink in to many more people that someone who through press and media reports was very much part of everyday life is gone. Cyrus Shah, Channel 4 News, at Buckingham Palace.
Well, as we've heard, the Prime Minister has said he was devastated by the news and spoke of Diana as a wonderful, warm and compassionate person loved around the world. However, the government must now be involved in issues such as the funeral arrangements. Our political editor, Eleanor Goodman, joins us now from Downing Street. Eleanor, there are all sorts of things which happen in these really rather uncharted waters. Mourning, the funeral arrangements, as I've mentioned. What's happening?
Well, at the moment, it's a question of behind-the-scenes negotiations because, as you say, this is uncharted water because the Princess of Wales was, of course, no longer held the title Her Royal Highness, so there is no absolute requirement to have a period of official mourning. But I think, as you've seen from the reaction on the street in that earlier piece, the public are going to demand some form of mourning, and I think we can expect an announcement from the palace fairly soon, probably flags being flown at half-mast, some public buildings being closed, and already driving through London you see there are some flags being flown at half-mast at Harrods, for example, and on the House of Commons Church at St Margaret's. So already I think the nation is almost naturally going into a state of mourning.
Mourning, and then, is there any question of her lying in state or a state funeral or merely a large funeral? Again, there is no sort of a template for this.
There's no template, and obviously that is what people are talking about now. Obviously, I think that the desire in both Buckingham Palace and Downing Street will be to somehow tune into the public mood, this great sense of loss, but equally they have to keep to the laws of etiquette which have been laid down over the years. So I imagine we will get some form of announcement from the palace later today, but possibly not even until tomorrow. One thing we do know, that it's unlikely that the House of Commons will be recalled. Rather, the Speaker has put out a statement expressing the dismay and horror of MPs, but I think it's unlikely we will actually see tributes in the House of Commons at this stage.
Now, Mr Blair is in his Sedgefield constituency. Who actually will sort of take the lead for the government in these negotiations? We know the Lord Chamberlain is involved, but he's from the royal household. What sort of people come in to work on these occasions?
Well, different people for different aspects. The Leader of the House of Commons might be involved in some respects. The Minister of Culture maybe, in the sense that they have responsibility, I believe, for state funerals and for supervising periods of mourning. I imagine, though, as so often before, it will be the Prime Minister who will, if you like, guide the government through this, as you say, uncharted territory.
This is the interesting thing, because the government possibly is more in touch with people's feelings about Diana than the royal family, some of whom were deeply hostile to her. They may well not want quite the ceremony that the people through their government wish.
Yes, but above all, they want to restore a belief in the royal family, and they know that they have lost one of the members of the royal family who was most admired, most loved by the country. So they are not going to want to be seen to, as it were, selling her short at this moment. They are obviously going to do the thing as the public expects, and I imagine they will take some advice from the Prime Minister, who in turn, of course, has a private secretary whose job it is to liaise with the palace.
The king is dead, long live the king. It's not quite that situation, and indeed there is not very much constitutional implication to flow from the fact that the princess has died. Nevertheless, these things have a way of moving quite quickly. Would you anticipate that by, say, tonight, we'll know when the funeral is going to be, we'll know what the period of mourning is to be?
I would have thought we will begin to get some idea by tonight or tomorrow. The palace does not respond as quickly, as we know, as Downing Street does in these situations, and it's got to be the palace which takes the ultimate decisions.
Now, freedom of information was a plank upon which the government came into power. Suddenly they're confronted with a real need to look most acutely at what on earth they do to keep the press out.
Indeed, and it's interesting that in some of the first comments from ministers, from the Foreign Secretary and indeed from the Junior Home Office Minister, they've both talked about the aggressive nature of the press coverage of Princess Diana. I think the government is going to be very careful not to be seen to be acting on an emotional wave in response to the public. But equally, it's clear that the public is going to demand a fresh look at the privacy laws. And as a great populist, I'm sure Tony Blair will ensure that happens. I mean, as it happened, drove up this morning through Hungerford, which, as you know, is a town which, in the aftermath of the massacre there, resented press intrusion there. And the woman who was selling the papers, she had early editions, and on them were some stories about Lady Diana and Dodi, and she said, I hate having to sell these papers. I think it's appalling what the press has done to her. I'm ashamed of having to sell newspapers. It's obviously a one-off thing, but I think there will be a backlash against the press, which the government will have to respond to. But of course, they will find, as the previous government did, this very difficult line to tread between the need to protect people's privacy, to guard against intrusion, and the genuine need of the press to know. And the trouble is that if they go down the course which ministers looked at before, and the Select Committee looked at, this question of making it a criminal offence to intrude on private property, that of course would not have dealt with this situation, because this harassment, if that's what it was on public property. And of course the other problem is that, okay, you might try and legislate here, as indeed the French government paradoxically have done, but then what happens about the international media? Because that is where this huge market is for pictures.
There we must leave it. Thank you very much indeed. For the very latest from Paris, we're joined now by our reporter there, Kerry Marcus. Kerry, what have you been able to learn?
Well, here at the Host Hospital in Paris, crowds of people are gathering, not just journalists, but as you can possibly see, lots of onlookers as well. There are many, many bouquets of flowers piling up outside the main entrance of the hospital. They've been arriving in the last 2 or 3 hours. Little messages, mainly from Parisians rather than British people, as you'd expect. Clearly it's touched many people here as well as in Britain. Already arrived here today has been the French Prime Minister Lionel Jospin, who was in south of France at his party congress. Also the wife of the President, Bernadette Chirac, has also been here. Neither of them came in through the front entrance. Expected later today will be Tony Blair and Prince Charles, I understand, and it's also expected that Diana's body will be taken back to London at some point today. It's quite a sombre mood here because, of course, it's not yet clear quite how this accident happened. The French police, we understand, are still questioning the motorcyclists that they arrested at the scene. They'll be processing their tapes, looking to see what exactly they got and what role they might have played in the accident that ensued. Back to you in London.
Kerry Marcus, thank you. And of course that conjures the possibility even that Prince Charles and the Prime Minister will accompany the body home. We don't know, but that's clearly one of the things which must now be a possibility. For reaction now from the United States, we're joined live from Washington by our correspondent David Smith. David, I know only too well and I can see only too well. It is dead of night in Washington, but do you get any sense of a reaction there? Was it just in time before people went to bed?
Well, John, whatever was going on in Britain in the 1990s, there was never really any contest here on the other side of the Atlantic for public opinion between Charles and Diana. Princess Diana was much admired here, much loved, the kind of feisty spirit the Americans admired, battling all the odds. And her death tonight has brought shock and dismay across America. It's the middle of a holiday weekend here, but radio and television have interrupted live programmes in the night, regular programmes to go live to Paris and London. The President, on vacation, has issued a very poignant statement. Mr. and Mrs. Clinton said they were profoundly saddened by Diana's death, Both of us were very fond of the Princess, the President said. Our thoughts and prayers now are with her family, her friends, and especially her children.
Diana was much admired in Washington, not just for her style, but for her quiet political savvy as well. And her last visit here in June this year broke new ground even for her. She'd come to the American Red Cross to plead for the United States to support that ban on landmines.
There are said, ladies and gentlemen, to be around 110 million landmines undetected in the world. Even if we decided tomorrow to ban these weapons, this terrible legacy of mines already in the earth would continue to plague the poor nations of the world.
What we didn't know then, but we learned later, was that away from the cameras, Diana had gone to the White House to see First Lady Hillary Clinton to urge the President to support the ban. Mrs. Clinton was to acknowledge later that Diana's advocacy helped make Bill Clinton think again about the landmine issue. The Clintons were visibly shocked by all accounts when news of Diana's death reached them on vacation in Martha's Vineyard, embracing each other at a private party, then announcing they were leaving immediately. The reaction from California and Hollywood, where there'd been much talk in recent weeks of whether Diana and Dodi El-Fayed would set up home there, was sympathy laced with the strident. Film stars like Tom Cruise calling into American television to say how devastated he was by the news and how he too had been hounded by the paparazzi in the very same tunnel in Paris.
I've actually been in that same tunnel being chased by paparazzis, and they run lights and they chase you and harass you the whole time. It happens all over the world, and it has certainly gotten worse.
You can see there, John, Tom Cruise went on with real outrage in his voice to tell American television that in his view the paparazzi should be brought to justice. And on top of that, other stars in recent weeks, Madonna, Arnold Schwarzenegger, have been threatening lawsuits against the photographers who hound them. So you can feel how the establishment here is going to react to this.
Interesting, because of course there you have a constitutional guarantee of freedom of speech and freedom of information, and one wonders really whether America will now also join us in looking for a solution to this problem.
Oh, I think they already have, and I think what we're going to see is more people like Tom Cruise. It's quite extraordinary, by the way, in which he literally called in live and said, "I'm here, and I'm outraged by this. I knew Diana, I knew Dodi El-Fayed, and this is simply not acceptable, and these people should be brought to justice." I suspect this is going to be the cue, tragically, for an onslaught probably in the courts here by celebrities.
One quick final thought, David. How far was Princess Diana seen simply as a manifestation of princessdom, if you like, a rather glamorous one at that? And how far did she have anything to do with sort of portraying Britain in America?
Oh, a good deal. Her visits here in the past few years, even after the separation from Prince Charles, received much attention. And I don't think we should underestimate the quiet, discreet influence that she had on people. The landmine issue was a typical one. She'd done it before on AIDS on this side of the Atlantic. Come over here and quietly raised an issue through her status, through her style, through her celebrity, yes, but also making the point. And, of course, she had access because of who she was.
Mind you, of the terrible events of the night, Princess Diana and her companion Dodi El-Fayed had been dining at the Paris Ritz. As they left, they were hounded by press photographers on motorbikes. In a high-speed chase, their Mercedes car smashed into the wall of a road tunnel near the Eiffel Tower. The Prime Minister, Tony Blair, and Prince Charles are said to be travelling to Paris later today, and preparations are being made to fly Diana's body back to Britain. In Paris, there are reports that 16 paparazzi photographers have now been arrested and are being questioned. The possible role of the media in the tragedy has caused people here to call for new privacy laws. Tributes have been coming in from leading figures. President Clinton said he was deeply saddened by Diana's death. Mother Teresa, who's a friend of hers, said she and her missionaries nuns were praying for her. Charities linked to the princess are devastated. Derek Bodell, who's the director of the National AIDS Trust, said the Princess of Wales spoke out on behalf of people living with AIDS when others would not even say the word.
The boys and the family, because they, I think, also lost a very special mother. They were very high in the
private room in the palace. If you looked around the pictures, half of the pictures were the children. I mean, there were lots of pictures of people she'd been with. I very aware of the Mother Teresa one and different ones, but half the pictures around the room were the two sons.
And Ben, there will now be tremendous support from within the royal family for the two princes.
How do you think they will be able to handle that, given what you were saying earlier about this kind of thing not having happened, a bereavement of this kind within the royal family for a long time?
I no means of knowing how they will handle it, but I mean, I think that it is an extraordinarily difficult thing under any circumstances to be a member of the royal family and a child within the royal family. You have very, very few people who are close to you, and as has been said, she was a very close mother and a very attentive mother. And the loss of that relationship, I mean, clearly would be irreplaceable. It would be for anybody, but it would be very, very difficult for them. I think they would have a very, very hard time, and everybody must appreciate that. And I hope the media will appreciate it and give them a break.
Lord Archer, when she talked to you about the princess, you've talked about the photographs being there around her apartment. But when she talked to you about the princess, what kind of language did she use?
Well, that was the affection of a mother. There were two levels. One where she was very aware that Prince William would one day be our monarch. And so she talked about her son in that way. And she talked about Harry in a slightly different way, and the role she had to play with both of them. She also had a wicked sense of humour too. I remember her once when showing me a picture of Prince William and saying, he's growing very tall, Geoffrey. And we know which side of the family that came from, don't we? So she had a wicked sense of humour as well, which I think we all loved.
Well, Lord Archer and Mike Whitlam and Ben Pimlott, thank you very much for the moment. And we go now to Neil Bennett, who is at Buckingham Palace. Neil, the crowd's still growing?
Yes, they are. They started arriving here at about 5 o'clock this morning, just as soon as people started hearing the news. Now, behind me, outside the palace and on the steps of the Victoria Memorial at the top of the Mall, there are now several hundred people here. Some crowd barriers have been brought in because obviously the police are expecting more and more people to come during the course of the day, just as a personal gesture, just as some kind of personal way of expressing their shared grief.
Neil, thank you very much. And we go now to Lance Price, who is in Downing Street. Lance, are Downing Street going to be involved in the arrangements for the funeral?
Yes, I spoke to the Prime Minister's press secretary a short time ago, and he was saying that the Prime Minister will certainly be involved in those arrangements and in what he described as some sort of official period of mourning. The exact nature of that has yet to be decided, of course, but discussions will almost certainly be going on already about that. After the Prime Minister has given his words of tribute that we're expecting any minute now in his constituency in the North East, he's expected to travel to Chequers. And of course, the Princess was herself a guest at Chequers earlier this summer when she met the Prime Minister, and the Prince William was there as well. The Prime Minister's staff have been saying that he really did regard her as a huge asset to Britain. He held her in the very highest regard and was personally very, very upset by the news. And from all the political leaders, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of the Liberal Democrats, all of them saying that their first thoughts and their prayers this morning are with the family and in particular with the princes.
And the two princes reportedly played football with the Prime Minister's children when they were at Chequers.
That's right, and it does seem that there was a real rapport there, and that it was the first time that the Prime Minister had met the Princess as Prime Minister, as it were, although they had met previously on other occasions. And he really did feel that she was playing an extraordinarily important role. A wide range of subjects were discussed, including, of course, her concern about the issue of landmines.
That needs energy. So you combine these two.
So these other, as I said, there is normally quite a crowd on a Sunday when the royals are in residence of Balmoral anyway. But I think people from Braemar and Ballater, the nearby towns, who wouldn't normally come here on a Sunday, will be coming to pay their respects today.
OK, Rona, at Balmoral, stay on station and keep us informed of any developments there. We understand the Prince of Wales will be leaving Balmoral at some stage later in the afternoon to head to Paris. The two young princes staying at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire for the time being.
We've been hearing from Diana's friend, Mother Teresa, who says that she was desperately saddened at the news of the death of Princess Diana. The head of the Roman Catholic Church in England and Wales, Cardinal Basil Hume, has extended his deepest sympathy to all the royal family. Earlier, he told Sky's Richard Bestick, she was a woman of great compassion.
I think she had a deep religious instinct, and I think that her compassion was part of that. and she certainly had a feel for people who were in distress. And I think people who've suffered, and she suffered a lot in life, I think do become sensitive. If they don't become hardened, they become sensitive to other people who are in need and who are suffering. And I think that was very important to her, that she should, as it were, minister to these people who were in need and were suffering.
Cardinal Basil Hume. We've got cameras moving to some of the most important points in the country. This is Trimdon, County Durham. Grey and miserable morning there to suit the tone of this tragic day in British history. And the photographers are waiting for Tony Blair, the Prime Minister, to emerge to make his considered statement. He was woken up during the night, like so many people around the world, to be told of the news. He made a short reactive comment, but we're expecting some more detail from Mr. Blair, although we're not necessarily expecting any official arrangements to be announced regarding the Princess of Wales's funeral, which would presumably happen later in the week. Tony Blair due any minute now. Well, while the world mourns the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, in one corner of England, her passing is especially tragic. Sky's John Ray has been to Althorp, the Spencer family seat.
If the whole of Britain is in mourning, then the grief is perhaps deepest in this quiet Northamptonshire village. Many here worked in Diana's family home, Althorp Hall, close by, and knew her personally.
There was just something about her, like an aura about her, like there was about her father, because he was the same.
A special person?
Yeah, very special, yes.
Oh, she was a lovely person. I mean, she was kind and shy, really, when I first knew her, you see. But I just can't come to terms with it yet.
At the main entrance to the hall, closed to the public today, floral tributes began to arrive in the early hours. One read simply, "To the most beautiful princess in the world." Another, "To Dodie and Di, may you rest in peace together always."
We was down the house yesterday. We had a tea party for the village down the house yesterday. And you tend to think of these things, you know, of wandering around the place, you know. Yeah, just sad. It's very sad, yeah.
For villagers here, the pain is just too much to take in. And they say Diana's public persona wasn't the real princess. They prefer to remember the quiet, shy, and above all, caring local girl. John Ray.